Hey everyone, Morgan from Breakthrough Fitness here, and this week our question of the week was which of these joints is the most mobile in the human body? And there are a few answers up here that could be a possibility, but right away we can kind of rule out the knee joint and the elbow joint, just because those are hinge joints. So both your knee and your elbow work in one direction. Yes, you can move laterally a little bit with those, but there is a reason why, a lot of athletes have knee injuries, because they get hit laterally and your knee just doesn't have the mobility. So those are hinge joints. They are not the most mobile joints. Then we have both the hip and the shoulder, which are ball and socket joints. And ball and socket joints are much more mobile. They're the only two mobile joints in the human body. But the reason that these are more mobile are because they have a ball at the end of the bone, and then there's a socket that goes around it. And because of that ball, you're able to move in a lot of directions. So if you think about your hip and your shoulder, we can move not just forwards, backwards, but also out to the side. Same thing with our shoulders. We can move in a lot of directions. So between the hip and the shoulder, which one is more mobile? Let's start with the hip joint. Your hip joint is obviously kind of towards the bottom of your pelvis. So I'm not a drawer, but we're going to give our best shot. So if this is your pelvis here, and then it kind of comes like this, and it's like a heart. This is not anatomically accurate. We're just going to roll with it. Your hip ball and socket joint, that socket is kind of right here. And then the top of your femur makes up the ball and kind of goes like that. And then there's your leg. And you have that on both sides. Now, it is a ball and socket. It is like a true socket. The ball is in there. But because of the angle of the pelvis, the top of that socket limits the range of motion that you can lift your hip up. So there are some super mobile people out there that can put their, leg behind their head. Most of us out here, even with healthy amounts of flexibility, cannot do that. So therefore, when we compare that to the shoulder joint, which is much more what I would like to say a golf ball on a tee. So you have kind of your collarbone that comes together along with your scapula. So the collarbone's on the front, the scapula's on the back. But it makes kind of this place for your shoulder. And then you have the head of your humerus right here hangs down. And then this is your humerus of your arm. This joint is much more mobile because the ball is, even though this is a socket right here, it's much more like a golf ball on a tee. And then we have muscles that go over the top that attach, that make up your rotator cuff. So those muscles go over the top of it. Same with your hip. You have muscles that go over the top. So this ball and socket joint is here, and then you have some smaller muscles that kind of hold it in here. And same thing up here on the top and the bottom, we have muscles that hold that on place. But because this is much more laterally, your shoulder has a lot more range of motion. But in application, that also means that that shoulder joint is at a much higher risk of injury. So although we do hear of people having hip injuries, and as practitioners, we work with a lot of people who have dysfunction of their glutes and get IT band syndrome, different things like that. Obviously, we hear of people needing hip replacements as we age, but this joint in general is a lot safer. Shoulders are a lot trickier because these small rotator cuff muscles, there's 4 of them holding that joint on. They're really vulnerable to injury. And just because we can move in max ranges of motion doesn't always mean we should, especially under high load. So we want to, if you're going to move in a, way, like for example, reaching behind you, this is actually quite dangerous for your shoulder if you have not been training and strengthening up your shoulder joint. So if you're driving and you reach for something in the seat behind you that has weight, we're putting a lot of tension on the shoulder joint, and especially that like subscapularis muscle that is behind the head. So behind, if we were looking from the backside, your scapula would be right here. That muscle sits between the scapula and that joint. It can get pinched, and then we're putting tension on there, and that can cause irritation. We can tear. And those muscles are also so small that if you do tear a rotator cuff muscle, a lot of times it's really difficult to fully recover from those because you only have so much tissue to work with. So even though our joints are really incredible and can do a lot of things, it's really important to strengthen those joints by strengthening the muscles around them. So the hip can be strengthened by strengthening the glutes, the quads, and the hamstrings. Shoulders, we need to isolate deltoids, rhomboids, the teres major and minor, as well as the pectoral, bicep, tricep. All of those muscles should be isolated and strength trained maximally, and then practicing movements that you're going to be doing in your everyday life or in your sport. If you have more questions about how these joints function or why it's important to strength train to keep your joints safe, please let us know or schedule a free discovery session soon.